diplomatic row between Turkey and the Netherlands has escalated.
Hollanda'da Nazi uygulamalarını hatırlatan diplomatik rezalet.
Premier Rutte noemt de houding van de Turken totaal bizar.
Turkey's president has escalated the war of words.
Branding the fellow NATO member a Nazi remnant.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. Turkey gears up for its upcoming referendum, but many of the headlines and much of the heat are coming from elsewhere. The controversy over Israel's new public broadcaster and the lawmakers trying to stop government interference. The tale of two of Pakistan's biggest news channels going at each other on the air and in court. Plus, who decides what's on the fake news agenda?
This isn't the Times, for Christ's sake. This is patriotnews.info.
We take an inside look at a fictional fake news site. In just under a month from now, voters across Turkey will vote in a referendum on the future shape of their government, and by extension, how much power they're prepared to invest in President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So why is so much of the breaking campaign news coming out of Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands? Because the Turkish diaspora in Europe could prove crucial to the outcome. There are as many as 3 million Turkish votes in European countries up for grabs. Erdogan is looking for a yes vote, which would lead to constitutional changes that would turn Turkey into a presidential system with Erdogan and the AK party he leads at the top. When some European governments denied the AK party permission to hold campaign rallies on their territory, the diplomatic fallout was swift. The subsequent war of words has been covered heavily by Turkish media outlets that back Erdogan, and these days that means almost the entire domestic television news industry. Journalists there understand that coming out in favor of a no vote is one thing, but to be too critical of the president leading the yes forces could cost them their jobs and land them alongside Kurds, Gulenists, and others Erdogan calls enemies of the state. Our lead story this week is about Turkey's political future, but our starting points are in the European countries where the campaign and the coverage are making news. A Turkish political demonstration on the streets of Rotterdam. Expats were protesting the Dutch government's refusal to allow the Turkish foreign minister to speak at a rally in the city when a protester was attacked by a police dog. As the images instantly made their way across Turkish news feeds, President Erdogan called the Dutch Nazi remnants and warned the government there not to interfere in Turkey's referendum.
Bunun bedelini ödeyeceksin. Bunun bedelini ödeyeceksin.
The president effectively wrote the next day's headline for Turkish news editors to cut and paste. And, across the board, they seemed happy to do so.
This is nothing new. After he said they will pay, Erdogan's Nazi remnants remark was the next thing to make headlines. They are used to reporting stories based on Erdogan's statements. They report in the same way, based on the same source. This goes beyond media control. It shows that the newspapers have turned into a tool of propaganda.
Propaganda aracı haline dönüştüklerini gösteriyor aslında bize. İşte mesela demişler Nazilerin köpekleri.
I saw headlines and comments such as Nazi dogs and Wilders dogs. The Turkish newspaper Takvim singled out the Dutch prime minister using photos of him with a police dog, implying that he is a dog. The message was that this was an offense to Turkey and to the Turkish people.
Türklüğe bir hakaret olduğuna dair başlıklar vardı.
Sometimes our media behaves like the supporters of a football team. We cannot change our habits. So the fact that a number of media outlets use similar headlines does not mean they were written by one person, but that the case was perceived similarly by different segments of society. That proves that there is diversity.
There are diverse views on the subject. That of the AK party member of parliament, the journalist with the pro-government paper, as opposed to the academic, a mass media specialist at Galatasaray University, and the columnist at an online news site set up by dissident Turkish journalists. The series of bilateral incidents over the AK party's planned rallies got its start in Germany, where the Merkel government refused to allow gatherings in 3 cities earlier this month. But Ankara and Berlin had another issue brewing before that. with the arrest February 17th by the Turkish authorities of Deniz Yücel, a dual national correspondent based in Turkey for the German paper Die Welt. The charges relate to leaked emails his paper published from the account of President Erdogan's son-in-law. Yücel is accused of spreading propaganda and alleged links to the Kurdish PKK, a movement the Turkish government labels a terror group. Erdogan, despite the office he holds, is seldom shy to comment on cases that are before the courts.
Dedim ki o gazeteci değil, o terörist.
We can safely say that this was a political maneuver. Erdogan and Merkel had met a short while before Deniz Yücel was arrested. And Merkel, for the first time in a while, criticized Turkey over freedom of the press. This is yet another example of Erdogan scoring political points by heightening tensions.
Critics are constantly saying journalists are being mistreated. In Turkey, there is the rule of law. Is a doctor above the law? Does he or she have the right to commit a crime? Does a member of parliament have the right to commit a crime? Does a journalist have the right to commit a crime? If Deniz Yücel committed a crime, it will be proven. If not, he will be released.
There are 6,000 journalists in Turkey accredited by the Directorate General of the Press, from The Guardian, The New York Times, Le Figaro, Le Monde, Al Jazeera. They are able to report, write articles and express their opinions without any restrictions. None of them are pro-Turkey, so why was it only the Die Welt correspondent who was arrested?
There are other media issues that stand between Germany and Turkey, including the case of Can Dündar, the former editor of Cumhuriyet. Dündar and a colleague were convicted last year of espionage after they published classified documents that they said revealed covert Turkish arms shipments to Syrian rebels. They fled to Germany. The Merkel government hasn't just allowed that. Its justice minister recently hosted Dündar at a reception. Dündar has also launched a Turkish news website from Germany, which the government in Ankara has blocked from being seen in Turkey, which was already among the world's leading jailers of journalists well before the crackdown that followed the failed coup last July.
Last year, Reporters Without Borders and Biyanet did research showing that 7 of the 10 most popular media outlets in Turkey, including television channels, radio stations and websites, are under government control. More than 150 journalists are in prison. What is striking about these criticisms in the pro-government media on restrictions on freedom of speech is that there is no mention of oppression in Turkish politics.
Doğan is one of Turkey's largest media companies. Last month, when one of its newscasters on Kanal D, İrfan Dihermenci, tweeted that he would be voting no in the referendum, Doğan fired him. And Doğan is hardly unique. The editor-in-chief of Turkey's most circulated newspaper, Hürriyet, was dismissed 2 weeks ago after publishing a story on unrest within the Turkish military.
Erfan Değirmenci has been presenting the news for the last 4 or 5 years at Kanal D. Maybe he's not getting ratings. Maybe people are bored of him. I don't know. You should ask the company. I cannot speak for them. If their managers claim they did this because of government pressure, then we have something to talk about. But as they have not said it, it is not necessary.
That argument is undermined by the fact that no news outlet that fires an employee over political pressure ever likes to admit it. Individual cases aside, the government has dispensed with an entire regulatory body, the Supreme Election Council, which was responsible for ensuring balanced news coverage when Turks go to the polls. That job now belongs to the broadcast regulator, RTÜK, which is populated with members appointed by the AK Party government.
During past election campaigns, there have been huge fines, especially at A Haber, a pro-government channel. It was fined by the Supreme Election Council many times. Since then, the pro-government media has been complaining. The purpose of this executive decree was to eliminate this problem and avoid scrutiny.
This power has been transferred to the Radio and Television Supreme Council, RTÜK, which is controlled by the AK Party. They declared it by emergency decree and did not feel the need to explain or justify it. We did not even discuss it in the media.
Medyada tartışmadık bile.
Because there was no parliamentary debate, no vote, no legislation, just an emergency decree in the midst of a referendum campaign. Now, with quaint notions such as balance and fairness set aside, the Turkish news media can, like their president, focus on the job at hand, making a compelling case for freedom of expression elsewhere. Other media stories that are on our radar this week. The launch of Israel's new public broadcaster, which has been 3 years in the making, continues to be mired in controversy, and the issue is government control. The network will be known by its Hebrew name, Khan, which means here. It will replace the Israel Broadcasting Authority, which has been in operation since 1948. The Communications Ministry has drafted legislation which, if brought forward to the Knesset, would give the Netanyahu government the power to directly appoint its allies to the body that oversees the channel, including the chairperson. Prime Minister Netanyahu temporarily stepped down from his dual post as communications minister last month, while he is under investigation in a corruption case that he says is going nowhere. Netanyahu's acting communications minister, Tzachi Hanegbi, is assumed to be taking orders from the prime minister as long as he's in the job. However, Netanyahu's finance minister, Moshe Kalon, says he will oppose the new legislation. I committed to ensuring freedom of expression and freedom of the press, he said. There will be no subordination to politics. It's been nearly 2 years since we first reported on a controversial piece of legislation passed in Spain known as the gag law, severely restricting the rights of journalists to cover certain kinds of protests. The first prosecution under that law has just been dropped. Officially known as the Public Safety Law, the measure makes it illegal for unauthorized filming or publishing of pictures of police operations. The reporter charged was Axier Lopez, who works for the Basque weekly magazine Argia. He was charged for posting pictures online of what appeared to be security officers making an arrest. The authorities said that those images put the officers' safety at risk. They fined Lopez just over 600 euros. This past week, just ahead of that conviction being appealed, prosecutors in Madrid dropped all charges against Lopez, saying the case lacked the necessary standards to go forward. The reporter welcomed the decision, saying he hoped it would serve as a precedent for similar cases. His magazine, which publishes in Basque, had this message on its front page. "We will never be silent," it said, "under any circumstances or by any means." The motives are as of yet unclear, but another journalist has been murdered in the Philippines. On March 13th, Joaquin Briones, a columnist for the Manila-based tabloid paper Remate, was shot dead by 2 men on a passing motorcycle. The Presidential Task Force on Media Security, set up last year by President Rodrigo Duterte to protect journalists, says it has an investigation underway. Briones also anchored a radio program called Dos por Dos, which touched on local issues. Since 1992, when the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists started keeping records, more journalists have been killed in direct relation to their work in the Philippines than any other country apart from Syria or Iraq. The case failed to attract much attention, but as 2016 drew to a close, a court in London convicted the owners of a news channel of slander and libel and awarded £3 million in damages to the plaintiff in the case, another news channel. What set the case apart was the fact that a British court was ruling on a squabble between 2 of the biggest media players in Pakistan. The very public battle between GOTV and ARY has been characterized as a low point for the Pakistani news media, and there have been a few. The television news sector in Pakistan has exploded in size in the 15 years since the days of only one state-owned domestic channel. However, the quality of the journalism often gives way to sensationalism and irresponsible reporting, and in this case, reckless accusations of blasphemy. Some see the conflict between GEO and ARY as a kind of proxy war for a larger struggle involving the Pakistani powers that be over who really controls the country. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on a slightly complicated media story that reveals much about politics and power in Pakistan.
When it began, around 2014, it seemed like a teenage spat. an adolescent battle between two of Pakistan's biggest news channels, Jio and ARY.
पाकिस्तान को बताएगा सबसे पहले ARY न्यूज।
हर जगह, हर वक्त, सबसे पहले आपके लिए Jio News.
Pakistan's electronic media landscape had only opened up to private players about 12 years ago, and as the TV channels entered their teens, the fight for market share was heating up.
Initially, this battle started off as being commercial, and the narratives that we saw put forward was, oh, we have beat the other channel, we have been #1, we have got the footage first.
सोच का आजाद होना जरूरी है। मेरी जद्दोजहद जारी है।
So the competition was rooted and its demonstration was rooted in how well the channels themselves were performing. However, over time, it has morphed into something way more ugly, way more public.
April 2014 marked a turning point in the competition between the two channels. An attempt on the life of Jio News' most prominent anchor, Hamid Mir, put the journalist and his channel on a collision course with the Pakistani intelligence agency, the ISI. Mir had reported extensively on the agency and said he was convinced it was behind the attack.
हामिद मीर ने साफ-साफ बताया था कि अगर उन्हें कुछ हुआ तो इसकी जिम्मेदार ISI और इसके चीफ होंगे.
This wasn't the first time the ISI was being accused of targeting a journalist. In 2011, investigative reporter Salim Shehzad was kidnapped and then found dead in northeast Pakistan. Shehzad had documented 3 warnings from the ISI, letting him know his work had put him on their radar. Now, 3 years later, the Mir case put the lingering issue of alleged rogue operations of the ISI back in the headlines, and ARY waded into the debate.
क्या ISI सरबराह पर झूठा इल्जाम सहाफत है?
The lines were drawn. When ARY backed the ISI, it ostensibly aligned itself with the intelligence community and the military, the Pakistani establishment. Jio, on the other hand, was seen to be allied with the elected government.
The Jio-ARY debacle was perceived to be a proxy war between the establishment and the government of Pakistan. The establishment in our country has been extremely strong. We've had military rule for over 32 years. And when we have had democracy, we've had instances where the military has been very reluctant to let go of foreign policy. Was media used in this debacle between the government and the establishment? Of course.
ARY made it personal and took it to the top.
बाबा जी से सवाल पूछना चाहता हूँ कि मीर शकील और रहमान, क्या ये सच है कि दूसरी हुकूमतों से आप पैसे लेके पाकिस्तान है उसको तब्दील करने की कोशिश की?
Mir Shakil ur Rahman owns Jio and its parent company, the Jung Group. ARY alleged that Rahman had taken money from Indian intelligence and it accused him of blasphemy. Such accusations, and they have happened before on the country's airwaves, can get you killed in Pakistan. The journalism behind the allegations didn't pass the smell test.
One of the main allegations was that we had run this campaign for peace between India and Pakistan, which was a media-led campaign. The Times of India and the Jung Group had come together. This was completely an initiative that was funded entirely by ourselves. We had absolutely no funding from any international organization, let alone intelligence agencies. And yet, continuously, documents were waved on the screen. Spurious things were brought in.
Jio News, जो कि मुल्क दुश्मनी की अपनी एक तवील तारीख रखता है.
The echo chambers, were resonating at that time. Social media was going berserk. That we were some sort of traitors.
Editorial stance different हैं दोनों के.
The editorial stance taken by our channels on various issues are different, and of course every story does have different angles and elements. It is our job as journalists to present a comprehensive view of matters. However, if you work on the behest of any government or you ally yourself with a government, then your journalism is flawed. And the Jung and Jio Group's output are perfect examples of this.
The kind of allegations, the kind of slander that went on, you really have to see it yourself.
मीर शकील उर रहमान जियो और जंग ग्रुप के मालिक आज सुबह 3 बजे दुबई फरार हुए. ज़राए का ये बताना है कि मीर शकील उर रहमान को फरार कराने में हुकूमत ने अहम किरदार अदा किया है.
Things like this were said that people working at Jio had committed blasphemy when they really had not. That Shakil ur Rahman was a traitor.
कि बाज़ चैनल्स नौजवान नस्ल के ज़हनों में किस तरीके से इस्लाम के बारे में शुकूक व शुबहात पैदा कर रहे हैं और अमूमी तौर पर ये काम बैरून मुल्क फंडिंग से किया जा रहा है.
The kind of accusations that were thrown particularly blasphemy. In a country like Pakistan, what it leads to is vigilante justice. It's not the courts that you fear at a moment like this, but the threat of random violence being perpetuated against you.
It was in the garb of journalism, it was perhaps one of the most disgusting, lethal propaganda that we saw on television.
Media regulators in Pakistan, like the channels they oversee, are also a work in progress. PEMRA, the Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, took a laissez-faire approach until a recent shift towards being more hands-on, a move many skeptics say is driven by politics. Jio and the Jung Group took their case against ARY to PEMRA and the Pakistani courts. Those cases dragged on. They are still pending. In the meanwhile, Jio turned to a different legal system with different players in Britain.
Having gone to the local courts and not having got justice, we decided that because we were also visible in the United Kingdom, it was imperative that we cleared our name even in that jurisdiction. And that is why we went to the UK.
ARY also has transmissions in the UK. A large chunk of the income actually comes from Britain and from the Pakistani diaspora. So they hit them where it really hurt. And as a result, ARY had to pay £3 million to Jio.
It is our hope, really, that this judgment will be studied. We live in this era now where everybody's talking about false news and alternative facts. And I think this is very important, that there should be some sort of course correction, because the line between fact, opinion, fair comment really needs to be looked at very, very closely now.
It's likely that in Britain, a betrayal against the nation of Pakistan is probably not assessed as seriously as betrayal against the British state. On the matter of blasphemy, Pakistani law is very clear. But in Britain, people can seek political asylum on the basis that they have been charged with blasphemy in Pakistan. They are granted protection on this basis. So overall, it's possible that the case against ARY simply wasn't properly and effectively assessed by the British courts.
What are the lessons that we have learned from this case? If you look at the Pakistani media landscape, we have another TV channel which is doing exactly the same that ARY was doing.
कि ये शख्स न सिर्फ पाकिस्तान की तबाही का जिम्मेदार बल्कि किस तरह इस्लाम पर भी वार कर रहा है.
So has it stopped the slandering and the libel? It hasn't.
15 years in, Pakistan's private TV outlets are still growing in number, but the quality of the journalism falls well short of the quantity of the output. The spectacle of two channels bickering on the air and in the courts does neither of them credit. It hints at a state of crisis in Pakistan's news broadcasting space, probably the most influential medium in a strategically important country. And that is not good news.
Finally, fake news has gone from an irritant to a problem to an industry. But how does it work? Who gets to decide what stories become breaking fake news? Is there a Pulitzer Prize for speaking falsehoods to power? Do the people who produce fake news have a fake newsroom? The team at collegehumor.com explored some of those questions, taking you inside an editorial meeting at a fictional site called Patriot News. And as absurd as this video is, it does have a ring of truth to it. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Chris, what have you got?
Donald Trump says what?
It's a good start. What does he say?
I don't know.
All right, we'll figure it out by 2, and it better not be true this time.
Oh, come on. Everything the guy says sounds fake.
That's not my problem. Terry.
I'm working on a story on conflicts of interest in government.
Why? No, Terry, I looked at your earlier work on this piece. I don't think there's not a story there.
How can you say that? There's barely anything here. It's almost all fake.
No, this is thoughtful journalism, and I'm looking for sub-tabloid schlock. This isn't the Times, for Christ's sake. This is patriotnews.info. We don't have a reputation to uphold. I believe the truth is powerful, and it takes constant vigilance to drown out that truth with noise.
I don't have sources.
What did you say?
Sources. Hundreds of them. All of them totally non-existent. I don't have quotes from named figures. I don't have peer-reviewed studies. I even don't have video evidence. And none of it points to a worldwide conspiracy of the highest institutions of power. Including you, Pete.
Piss off a lot of people running a story like that. which would probably get us a lot of clicks. So
I know, so many clicks.